trial against the Trump organization that's coming up.
OK, Neda, thank you very much. Well, let's speak now with the former federal prosecutor, Joe Moreno. Joe, good to talk to you. How much of an impact do you think what's going on with Mr. Weisselberg could potentially have on former President Trump?
Well, Miriam, it will certainly have an impact on the Trump organization, because when you prosecute a company, who are you really prosecuting? You're prosecuting the employees and the officers and the directors of that company. So some individuals will certainly be involved to their detriment when Mr. Weisselberg testifies against the organization later this year. Now, as far as former President Trump himself, that's less clear about whether or not he has any kind of personal exposure. He was the president of the Trump organization during some of these years, and so there certainly could be some direct involvement in some of these tax issues. But that's well yet to be seen, because it's not any kind of commitment by Mr. Weisselberg to testify against Donald Trump personally, just against the organization.
OK, well, stay right there, Joe, because there are other elements, legal elements that the former president is facing. In fact, Donald Trump is facing multiple investigations from multiple angles in New York, Georgia, and at a federal level. One of them is the investigation into the alleged removal and destruction of official records and classified documents from the White House. Well, that investigation is what led to FBI agents searching his Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida. The warrant has been made public, but not the affidavit that supported the warrant, now, which is where most of the detail is going to be. Well, Donald Trump has demanded it be released in the interest of transparency. And today, America's top media companies tried to persuade a judge in Florida to make that affidavit public to help determine if the Justice Department had legitimate reasons for the search. Well, the Justice Department attorneys have argued that releasing it causes significant and irreparable damage to this ongoing criminal investigation. But the judge has ruled there are portions of the affidavit that could be unsealed for the public. Well, the Department of Justice will now have a week to decide on any redactions. Then the judge will consider which parts of the document should be released. Well, let's bring in our panel again and bring in you again, Joe, because I wanted to ask you, looking at what potentially could be released, what may not be released, is it normal for an affidavit, for the details to be released to the public? I guess not.
Miriam, nothing about this case is normal. The judge is probably under a lot of pressure, as is the Justice Department, because this case is so public and because it's so unprecedented that it focuses on a former president. There's tremendous pressure on them to give as much transparency as possible. The problem with that, as the Justice Department argued in court, is that the investigation apparently is in its early stage. And so if they give the details of this affidavit, it very well could contain what we call sources and methods, right? How they got certain information to lead them to believe that a crime was committed, and from whom. If the Justice Department has to reveal this information, that could jeopardize witnesses, cooperators, right? It could indicate who they are, and it could indicate what the theory of the government's case is. So normally, a defendant only gets this affidavit after he or she has been charged during the discovery process. Definitely not this early in the investigation, and definitely not an investigation so public.
So let me bring in Victoria here. Why do you think, Victoria, that there's so much pressure from the Trump camp to release these details?
Well, I think Joe made some really important points. The first is that in the Weisselberg case, there is nothing that yet implicates the former president. And, having worked with him for 4 years, the legal challenges to him were constant and relentless, and none of it actually wound up coming to anything. So I would be cautious. I would just say to your viewers, watch this play out. It should be a rule of law issue, not an issue about Donald Trump. And in terms of the Mar-a-Lago issue, again, I would agree this is unprecedented. And what's very confusing to me is how the Department of Justice could claim that the White House was not aware that this was happening, given the historic nature of this action. That gives me great concern that they're not coordinating well. And then to have the Attorney General come out and basically dare the former president to reveal some of the documentation, but then refuse to reveal the affidavit, just again seems very confused and inconsistent. And I'm very, very hopeful this gets cleared up, because I'm worried about American confidence in our institutions like the Department of Justice.
Joe, what's your response to that?
No, look, I mean, you have some great points there, and confidence is key here. We certainly have a large part of this country who are looking at this whole spectacle very skeptically. And the rule of law is key. You're supposed to follow crimes that lead to people. You're not supposed to investigate people in search of a crime. And so there are a lot of people who feel that President Trump, who's being kind of beaten on all ends, is a victim of just that. And so I think a lot of folks are saying, yes, let's wait, let's not jump to conclusions, and let's see what, in fact, the Department of Justice has, whether it's here, whether it's relating to January 6th, or any other matters involving former President Trump.
Let me talk about something else just for a second, because clearly some growing heat on the former president and these legal developments are pushing things. But instead of having a negative effect on his support, his funding numbers are actually growing. They're going through the roof. Reporting from the Washington Post has found that before the Mar-a-Lago search warrant, Donald Trump's political fund was receiving around $300,000 a day. But in the weeks since, he's now receiving upwards of $1 million a day. Victoria, that is just a massive rise. Why do you think people are suddenly now wanting to put more money into his campaign coffers?
Well, the only thing I'd push back on in there, Miriam, is that, you said it felt like the heat was growing. The heat has been on since 2015, if not before. And so what President Trump's supporters have seen is sort of cycle after cycle of Russiagate and various accusations of wrongdoing and illegal behavior come to nothing. And so I think they are at this point inclined to give him the benefit of the doubt, because in the past he has said these things have been witch hunts, and they've turned out to be largely thus. Now, I have no idea on these particular cases what the truth of the matter is, but he has this track record. So I think what you're seeing is a number of years coming to fruition, and folks feeling like he's being unjustly targeted.
And do you think that's why people are paying more money into his campaign? I mean, it's an incredible rise, isn't it, since last week?
It really is. And so from a U.S. political perspective, you might want to question the wisdom of the decision to do this right now, and what drove that timeline. If their goal was to weaken the former president, it certainly seems to have had the opposite effect.
OK. Let me bring you in now, Georgina. How much interest do you think there is in all these machinations and in terms of what's happening in Europe?
I mean, to be honest, very little. And I'm quite struck listening to both, John and Victoria, about how this is playing out, how much it's shaping the public debate and public discourse in the United States. Over in Europe, it's just very little attention being paid. No one really understands the ins and outs of the US legal system. But it also feels a little bit that Trump is a thing of the past. Now, I don't think that's quite right for, governments who are looking to the midterm elections and then looking at the presidential election that will follow. But in the minds, I think, of many Europeans, Trump is he's just forgotten, right? It's not the heat is on or it's off. It's no longer a question. And I think actually Europeans should be paying much closer attention to what's happening in the United States, because what happens there, does have repercussions for the rest of the world.
Georgina, thanks for that input. And Joe Moreno, as always, it's great to have you on the programme. Thank you.
Thanks, Miriam.
Now, let's bring you some breaking news coming